Have you ever been in a heated argument, feeling like you're about to lose it completely? We've all been there, whether it's a disagreement at work, a fight with someone you love, or a heated debate that's spiraled out of control online. The kind of moment where your pulse spikes, your jaw tightens, and every instinct in your body is screaming at you to fight back. But what if I told you there was a way to handle conflict, real, serious conflict, without throwing punches, literally or figuratively? What if the most powerful thing you could do in those moments wasn't to strike harder, but to think clearer? The ancient Stoics, masters of emotional control and rational thinking, had remarkable strategies for facing your enemy with grace and composure. These weren't soft strategies either. The men who developed them, Seneca, Epictetus, Marcus Aurelius, lived through war, political betrayal, slavery, and the deaths of loved ones. Their wisdom wasn't born in comfortable lecture halls. It was forged in the fire of real adversity. And what they discovered about conflict, about human nature, and about the power of the disciplined mind is just as relevant today as it was 2,000 years ago. In this video, you'll discover 13 Stoic-inspired techniques to tackle conflict head-on, drawn from the wisdom of these extraordinary thinkers. Trust me, these methods may demand more patience and effort than simply lashing out. But the rewards, inner peace, lasting solutions, and potentially transformed relationships are absolutely worth every ounce of effort you put in. So, are you ready to learn how to handle conflict like a true Stoic? Remember to hit the subscribe button and the notification bell so you never miss a video on facing life's challenges with the timeless wisdom of Stoicism. Remember, your greatest victory lies not in external battles, but in mastering your own mind and heart. Number 1. Delve into the depths of your adversary. Imagine standing at the edge of a furious river, the rapids foaming and churning with rage. The surface is violent, loud, and chaotic. Every instinct tells you to react to what you can see, to match the energy, to fight the current. But a wise Stoic would stop before diving in, their eyes fixed on the unseen depths below rather than the churning surface. Because beneath the fury of any river, there is always something quieter, something more telling. The rocks, the sediment, the direction of the current. And it is down there, in the depths, where the real story lives. Getting inside your opponent's mind is the foundation of this first Stoic tactic. It sounds simple, but in practice, it is one of the hardest things a human being can do in the middle of a conflict. The intensity of the moment makes it extraordinarily tempting to act fast, to react, to match energy with energy. The adrenaline is pumping, the ego is engaged, everything in you wants to respond immediately. But proper understanding, the kind that actually leads somewhere useful, requires setting aside snap judgment and looking past the obvious surface of the issue. As Epictetus reminds us, it is not the event itself that troubles us, but our view of it. And if that's true, then before we do anything else, we have an obligation to examine our view and their view as carefully as we possibly can. Here's how to begin this Stoic examination. Step away and observe. The first and most crucial move is to free yourself from the immediate moment. Take a deep breath, not as a cliché, but as a genuine physiological reset. When you breathe slowly and deliberately, you activate your parasympathetic nervous system, which literally lowers your heart rate and gives your rational brain a chance to catch up with your emotional one. Mentally step back and look at the situation with detached curiosity. Picture yourself as a fly on the wall, watching the exchange from the outside as if it were happening to two other people. What would you notice? What patterns would you see that you can't see when you're right in the middle of it? This emotional distance allows for deeper observation and clearer, more logical reasoning. It is not disengagement. It is the prerequisite for genuine engagement. Investigate their underlying why. Once you've created that space, shift into genuine inquiry mode. Ask sincere questions rather than rushing to form counter-arguments. And here's the key. Actually listen to the answers. Focus on understanding the reason behind their words and actions. What drives them? What worries them? What do they truly want from this situation? What life experiences have shaped the perspective they're bringing into this room right now? People rarely argue about what they claim to be arguing about. The surface issue is almost never the real issue. Open-ended questions like, what brought you to this point? Or, what are your deeper concerns here? Can unlock doors that direct confrontation would only slam shut. The goal at this stage is not to formulate your rebuttal, it's to genuinely understand. Examine through their lens. This is perhaps the most demanding step because it asks you to do something that feels almost unnatural when you're in conflict. It asks you to try to see the world through the eyes of the person you're fighting with. Not to agree with them, not to validate everything they're saying, simply to understand how the world looks from where they're standing. What values and beliefs are driving them? What experiences shaped those beliefs? What would you think, feel, and want if you had lived their life and not yours? This exercise is about developing genuine understanding and finding possible points of connection. It requires humility, it requires curiosity, and it is one of the most powerful tools you have for turning a battle into a conversation. Look for the hidden riverbed. Finally, dig beneath the surface. Conflict almost always grows out of something deeper: unmet needs, old fears, wounds that never fully healed. The person who seems unreasonably angry about a minor workplace disagreement may be carrying years of feeling overlooked or disrespected. The partner who explodes over something small may be reacting to a pattern they've been silently tolerating for months. Look past the current argument and try to identify the root causes driving the conflict. What needs are crying out to be acknowledged? What fears are surfacing that have nothing to do with the words being said? Understanding this doesn't mean excusing behavior. It means that you now have access to the real levers of resolution rather than endlessly fighting the symptoms while ignoring the cause. Just like a geologist studies rock layers to understand the deeper history of the land, you can uncover hidden common ground by practicing this Stoic depth-seeking technique. The once raging river will become a calmer stream with understanding and possible resolution embedded in its stones. Number 2, choose your battles wisely. Disagreements are everywhere in life, from heated political debates to petty spats in parking lots, from office tension that's been brewing for months to a single throwaway comment that lands the wrong way. The world is overflowing with potential conflicts, and if you treated every single one of them as a battle worth fighting, you would be exhausted before lunchtime. The Stoics understood this deeply, and it is why the second tactic urges us to choose our battles with real, deliberate care. Picture yourself standing before a vast battlefield. Every argument, every disagreement, every perceived slight could become a full-blown conflict if you let it. A wise Stoic would pause at the edge of that battlefield, carefully sizing up the terrain before charging in. They would ask themselves hard questions. Is this fight worth having? Will the outcome of this argument actually change anything important? Will it protect something I genuinely value? Or will it simply satisfy a momentary urge to be right? Because make no mistake, the urge to be right is one of the most dangerous forces in human relationships. It has ended friendships, destroyed marriages, and torpedoed careers. And most of the time, it isn't worth it. The Seneca test: pause and consider. Take Seneca's wisdom to heart when he says, "The greatest remedy for anger is delay." This sounds almost too simple, but the research on emotional regulation completely backs it up. When we are angry, the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for rational decision-making, is essentially being bypassed by the faster, more primitive emotional centers. The anger feels like clarity. It feels like you're seeing things exactly as they are. But in reality, you are seeing a distorted version of events filtered through a nervous system that is in fight or flight mode. By giving yourself even a few minutes, or better yet, a few hours, you allow the emotional charge to dissipate and your actual judgment to reassert itself. Before reacting automatically, slow down. Step back. Let the heat cool before you decide whether this is a battle worth entering. The Epictetus inquiry. Is this important? Once you've created that pause, ask yourself the honest question: is this argument genuinely affecting my values, my well-being, or something that truly matters in my life? Epictetus was relentless in pushing his students to distinguish between what was truly significant and what merely felt significant in the moment. Our emotional brain struggles to make this distinction. A rude email can feel like a personal attack. A disagreement about something trivial can feel like a matter of principle. But when you step back and apply the Epictetus test, does this genuinely matter? or does it just feel like it does right now? The answer is often humbling. Most of what we fight about is closer to a pebble in the road than a mountain worth scaling. The Marcus Aurelius principle: silence can be powerful. Perhaps the most counterintuitive of the Stoic principles on this list, and yet one of the most liberating. Marcus Aurelius, who ruled an empire and faced genuine consequential conflicts every single day of his reign, wrote extensively about the wisdom of simply letting things go. Not out of cowardice, not out of indifference, but out of the recognition that responding to every provocation is a form of weakness, not strength. It signals that your inner peace can be disturbed by anything and anyone. Choosing not to engage, genuinely choosing it from a place of calm rather than avoidance, is one of the most powerful statements you can make. It says, "This does not have the power to move me." The Stoic cost-benefit analysis: weigh the pros and cons. Before entering any conflict, do an honest accounting of what it will actually cost you, not just in the immediate term, but in terms of the relationship, your reputation, your emotional energy, and your time. Every argument extracts a price. Sometimes the price is worth paying, when something genuinely important is at stake, when a boundary is being violated, when silence would mean complicity. But often the price is far higher than the potential reward. The ability to walk away from a winnable argument because the cost of winning is too high. That is not weakness. That is Stoic wisdom at its finest. Number 3. Speak with calm and clarity. Picture yourself facing your opponent with your words ready for dialogue rather than your weapons drawn for war. This image matters because the way we enter a difficult conversation determines almost everything about how it will go. Walk in with your defenses up and your accusations loaded, and you will almost certainly trigger the same in the other person. Walk in with calm, clear intention to understand and to be understood, and you create the conditions for something entirely different to happen. The Stoic approach to communication is not about being passive or spineless. It is about being precise. It is about saying exactly what needs to be said in a way that has the best chance of actually being heard. Because what is the point of expressing yourself powerfully if the other person's defenses are so high that none of it gets through? Calm clarity is not the absence of conviction. It is conviction delivered in a form that can actually land. Sharpen your active listening skills. Real listening, the kind the Stoics practiced, is one of the rarest skills in human communication. Most people, in the middle of a conflict, are not listening to understand. They are listening to respond. They are waiting for a pause in the other person's speech so they can launch their next point. This is not listening. This is just taking turns talking. True active listening means giving your full, undivided attention to what the other person is saying without simultaneously preparing your rebuttal. It means paying attention to body language, tone, the things they're emphasizing, the things they're glossing over. It means occasionally reflecting back what you heard to confirm you understood it correctly. This kind of listening is disarming in the best possible way. It communicates respect. And when people feel genuinely heard, they become dramatically less defensive and dramatically more open. Acknowledge their emotions and validate their experience. There is a profound difference between agreeing with someone and acknowledging their feelings. You can completely disagree with someone's position while still validating that their emotional experience is real and understandable. Phrases like, "I can see why this situation feels frustrating to you," or "It sounds like this has been building up for a while," cost you nothing. They require no concession of your actual position, but they do something remarkable. They signal to the other person that you see them as a full human being with legitimate feelings rather than as an obstacle or an adversary. That signal alone can change the entire energy of a conversation. Express your concerns using I statements. The research on this is unambiguous. You statements trigger defensiveness, and I statements reduce it. "You always dismiss my ideas" puts the other person immediately on trial. "I feel overlooked when my input isn't acknowledged" opens a conversation. The content may be identical, but the framing is completely different. Speaking from your own experience, rather than rendering a verdict on the other person's behavior, keeps the conversation in the realm of feelings and needs rather than accusations and judgments. And feelings and needs are things people can actually work with. Speak with calm firmness, not aggression. Clarity and calm are not the same as softness. You can be completely clear about what you need, completely firm about what you will and won't accept, without raising your voice or resorting to personal attacks. In fact, a calm, measured tone often carries more authority than an aggressive one, precisely because it signals that you are in control of yourself. Aggression telegraphs that you've been destabilized. Calm firmness telegraphs that you haven't. And in any conflict, the person who appears more centered tends to hold more influence over the direction of the conversation. Focus on solving the problem, not winning the argument. This last point sounds obvious, but it is remarkably easy to forget in the heat of a real argument. At some point, for most of us, the goal of resolving the conflict quietly transforms into the goal of winning it, of being proven right, of making the other person admit they were wrong. This shift is subtle but catastrophic, because winning an argument and solving a problem are often mutually exclusive. When you shift your internal goal from "I need to win this" to "we need to fix this," something changes in how you show up. Your questions change, your tone changes. The entire dynamic of the conversation shifts from adversarial to collaborative. Number 4. Seek the shared path. Picture two climbers scaling what seem to be completely different peaks. The mountains look distinct, the routes look nothing alike, and from the bottom they appear to be heading in opposite directions entirely. But as they climb higher, something remarkable happens. The paths begin to converge. And at the summit, they discover they were heading to the same place all along. This is the Stoic vision of conflict resolution at its most optimistic and also at its most realistic. Because beneath almost every conflict, no matter how bitter or seemingly irreconcilable, there are shared human needs and common values waiting to be found. The Stoics believed deeply in the fundamental interconnectedness of human beings, what Marcus Aurelius called the common reason that links us all. The work of finding common ground is not naive idealism. It is a rigorous, practical discipline of looking beneath the surface positions to find the deeper currents that bind us. Shift the frame from me to we. Language shapes reality. When you're operating in me versus you mode, every move the other person makes looks like a threat or an attack, because that's what happens when you're in an adversarial frame. When you consciously shift to a we frame, we have a problem to solve together. We both want something from this situation. We are both human beings with legitimate needs. The landscape of the conversation changes entirely. This is not a rhetorical trick. It is a genuine cognitive reorientation that changes what you look for and what you find. Look for the needs beneath the surface. In conflict resolution theory, there is a crucial distinction between positions and interests. A position is what someone says they want. An interest is why they want it, the underlying need that the position is designed to satisfy. Two people can have completely opposing positions and almost identical underlying interests. A classic example, two people fighting over a single orange. One wants it for the juice, one wants it for the rind. If they had only negotiated their positions, they would have split it down the middle and both gone away partially satisfied. But if they had explored their underlying interests, they would have discovered that there was a perfect solution available all along, one that gave each of them exactly what they actually needed. The same principle applies to almost every human conflict. Find shared values and beliefs. Values are the bedrock beneath the interests. While interests tell you what someone needs in a specific situation, values tell you who they are, what they fundamentally believe in, what kind of person they are trying to be, what principles they would never compromise. And here is what the Stoics understood that most people miss. Even in the most heated conflicts, the parties involved usually share more fundamental values than they realize. They both care about being treated fairly. They both care about being respected. They both care about doing right by the people who depend on them. Finding those shared values doesn't resolve every practical disagreement, but it does transform the emotional tenor of the conversation from one of opposition to one of mutual recognition. Start small to build momentum. Don't try to solve everything at once. In long-standing or deeply entrenched conflicts, the temptation is to either avoid the whole thing or to try to resolve every single issue in one marathon session. Both approaches tend to fail. What actually works is finding one small point of genuine agreement, something both parties can honestly say yes to, and building from there. Small agreements create trust. They create the experience of cooperation, which makes further cooperation feel possible. They shift the emotional narrative of the conflict from "we can't agree on anything" to "we can actually work together when we try." That shift in narrative is enormously powerful. Number 5. Appeal to their inner values. Picture yourself standing before a great oak tree, its roots deeply anchored in the earth, its trunk immovable, its branches reaching out in every direction. Raw force alone won't move the oak. You could push against it with everything you have and accomplish nothing except exhausting yourself. But a wise Stoic would understand the power of working with the tree's nature rather than against it. Water doesn't fight rock. It finds the path of least resistance and over time reshapes the entire landscape. This is the Stoic tactic of appealing to inner values, and it is one of the most sophisticated and effective tools in the entire conflict resolution toolkit. The core insight is deceptively simple. People are far more likely to change their behavior or shift their position when they are shown that doing so is consistent with who they already believe themselves to be. Rather than attacking someone's stance directly, which almost always triggers defensive entrenchment, you find the values they already hold and show them how your proposed solution actually honors those values. You're not asking them to become someone different. You're showing them that being who they already are points in the direction you're suggesting. Map out their value landscape. Before you make your case, do your homework. What principles genuinely matter to this person? What do they take pride in? What would they consider a moral compromise? Pay attention to the stories they tell about themselves, the things they praise in others, the causes they support, the principles they invoke when they're explaining their own decisions. People reveal their values constantly, in their language, their choices, their reactions. If you're paying attention, you can build a fairly detailed picture of what someone's inner compass looks like. That picture is one of the most valuable tools you can bring into any difficult conversation. Bridge the value gap by finding common ground. Once you've mapped their value landscape, look for the places where their values and yours intersect. This is often more extensive than you'd expect. People who seem to be on completely opposite sides of an issue often share deep commitments to things like fairness, integrity, loyalty, or care for others. They simply express or prioritize those values differently, or they're applying them to different aspects of the situation. Finding those overlapping values gives you a shared moral language to work with, which is infinitely more productive than trying to argue someone out of their existing commitments. Speak their language. Once you have that shared moral language, use it. Frame your position in terms that connect with their values rather than your own. This is not manipulation, it is communication. There is a profound difference between trying to trick someone into agreeing with you and genuinely presenting your position in a way that is honest, complete, and framed in terms that are meaningful to them. The first is deceptive. The second is respectful. It says, "I understand what matters to you, and I want to show you that what I'm proposing is genuinely consistent with that." Show, don't just tell, how it aligns. Abstract arguments about values are far less convincing than concrete examples. Don't just tell someone that your proposed solution aligns with their commitment to fairness. Show them, specifically, how it does. Point to analogous situations. Draw on past decisions they made that reflect the same principle. Make it real, make it specific, and make it undeniable. The more concretely you can demonstrate the alignment between your position and their values, the harder it becomes for them to maintain their opposition without feeling like they're contradicting themselves. Number 6. Using humor wisely. Picture yourself walking a tightrope stretched across a deep canyon. One wrong step and you fall, but in your hand, you're holding a balancing pole, and that pole, when used correctly, is humor. It shifts weight, restores equilibrium, and keeps you moving forward when the ground beneath you feels impossibly precarious. There is a reason laughter has been used throughout human history to diffuse tension and create connection. A well-timed, well-targeted moment of levity can accomplish in seconds what hours of earnest dialogue might not. It reminds both parties that they are human beings, not just positions in a debate. It disrupts the escalating emotional feedback loop that drives conflict toward explosion. It creates a moment of shared experience in what has been an experience of opposition. But humor in conflict is genuinely dangerous if mishandled. As Seneca observed, A joke is a fragile thing, and a jest may turn into an insult. The line between a joke that diffuses and a joke that detonates can be razor thin, and it varies enormously depending on the person, the relationship, the history, and the specific emotional temperature of the moment. Know your audience well. What makes one person laugh will deeply offend another, and in a conflict situation, the margins for error are even smaller than usual. Before you attempt any form of humor, do a rapid but honest assessment. Does this person have a sense of humor? What kind? Do they tend towards self-deprecation, or do they prefer observational humor? Are there topics that are clearly off limits, either because they're too closely connected to the conflict itself or because they touch on something personally sensitive? The more accurately you can answer these questions, the better your chances of landing in the right place. Aim for shared laughter, not ridicule. The most dangerous form of humor in a conflict situation is humor at the other person's expense. Even if it's gentle, even if it's clearly affectionate, humor that positions you as the one making the joke and them as the target of it reinforces the very power dynamic that's driving the conflict. The kind of humor that actually heals is humor that both of you can genuinely share. Humor about the absurdity of the situation itself, or humor at your own expense. Self-deprecating humor in particular is remarkably effective in tense situations because it signals something important. I'm not taking myself so seriously that I can't laugh at myself. That kind of humility is disarming. Timing is everything. The same joke that perfectly diffuses a situation at the right moment will catastrophically explode it at the wrong one. Reading the emotional temperature of the room before attempting humor is not optional. It is essential. If the other person is still in the peak of their emotional intensity, if there is active pain or anger on the surface, humor at that moment will almost certainly land as dismissive. It says, "I don't take your feelings seriously. Wait for the temperature to drop at least slightly. Wait for a natural pause, a moment of shared exhaustion, a beat where both of you seem to recognize simultaneously that things have gone a little sideways. That is the window. Stay kind and keep it clean." There are entire categories of humor that have no place in a conflict resolution attempt. Anything based on stereotypes, anything that minimizes the other person's concerns, anything sarcastic, anything that scores points for you at their expense. Not only are these likely to escalate rather than diffuse, they're also simply unkind. And kindness, consistent, genuine kindness, is one of the most powerful conflict resolution tools available to any human being. Number 7, offer empathy. Picture yourself on a rugged mountain trail, looking across a gap at a fellow climber heading in what seems like the opposite direction. Their frustration and anger crackle through the valley like a gust of wind before a storm. The distance between you feels vast. The easiest thing would be to stay where you are and shout across the divide, but the Stoic response, the genuinely powerful response, is to make the effort to descend, to cross the gap, to close the distance. Not because you agree with where they're headed, but because real resolution requires real proximity. Empathy is not a soft skill. It is not a concession. It is not the same as agreement, and it is not weakness. Empathy is the cognitive and emotional capacity to accurately understand another person's experience from the inside, to feel at least partially what they feel, and to understand at least partially why they feel it. And it is one of the most powerful conflict resolution tools that exists, because it addresses the thing that is actually driving most conflicts in the first place, the desperate human need to be seen and understood. Shift your focus from me to them. The most fundamental shift in empathetic listening is this. For a period of time, you make the other person's inner experience your primary focus rather than your own. You set aside your own arguments, your own grievances, your own need to be understood, and you pour your attention into genuinely understanding theirs. This is temporary. You will have your turn, but it is complete while it lasts. This quality of attention is rare. Most people never experience it in a conflict. When they do, it is transformative. Listen beyond the words. Human beings communicate far more through tone, body language, facial expression, and pacing than through the actual content of their words. The words are the surface. Everything else is the depth. When someone says, "I'm fine," in a tight, clipped voice with their arms crossed and their eyes averted, the words and the everything else are telling completely different stories. Practice reading both simultaneously. The feelings beneath the words are almost always more important to address than the words themselves. Validate without judging. Validation is one of the most misunderstood skills in human communication. It does not mean agreement, it does not mean approval, it simply means acknowledging that the other person's emotional experience is real and understandable given their perspective. I can see why that would feel unfair from where you're standing, costs you nothing in terms of your actual position. But it does something remarkable. It removes the other person's need to fight for the legitimacy of their feelings. And once that fight is over, the conversation can actually go somewhere. Look for the hidden pain beneath the surface. Anger is almost never the primary emotion. It is almost always a secondary emotion, a protection against something more vulnerable underneath. Fear, shame, grief, loneliness. The person who is explosively angry in a conflict is usually terrified of something. If you can identify, even approximately, what that deeper vulnerability is, you have access to the real conversation, rather than the defensive performance that's obscuring it. This doesn't mean you psychoanalyze people out loud. That would be both presumptuous and counterproductive. It simply means that your response to them can be calibrated to the actual need rather than the surface presentation. Number 8. Embrace the art of compromise. Picture that great oak tree again, its branches swaying in the wind. Now picture a different scenario. Instead of trying to uproot the oak or forcing it to bend entirely to your will, you and the tree find a way to coexist. The wind learns to flow around the branches learn to flex without breaking. Neither side gets everything it wanted, but both survive, and over time, both thrive. The Stoics were not romantics about compromise. They did not believe that every conflict had a perfect solution that satisfied everyone equally. What they did believe was that the pursuit of absolute victory in human relationships was almost always self-defeating. That the person who insists on winning completely almost always ends up losing something more important than the argument. As Epictetus said, "Seek not to have things happen as you wish, but rather wish them to happen as they do, and you will live a tranquil life." Adaptability, genuine, principled adaptability, is not a sign of weakness. It is a sign of wisdom. Shift from me to we. The psychological reframe from competition to collaboration is not just motivational language. It literally changes the cognitive resources you bring to the problem. When your brain is in competition mode, it is scanning for threats, protecting territory, and looking for ways to defeat the opposition. When it's in collaboration mode, it is creative, flexible, and generative. The problems that seem unsolvable in competition mode often yield surprisingly elegant solutions in collaboration mode. Simply shifting your internal question from "how do I win this?" to "how do we solve this together?" can unlock options that weren't visible before. Identify shared goals. Strip away the immediate argument and go looking for the long-term interests that both parties share. In a workplace conflict, both parties probably want the team to succeed, the project to go well, the organization to thrive. In a relationship conflict, both parties probably want the relationship to be healthy, to feel respected, to build something lasting together. These shared goals exist even in the most bitter conflicts. They just get buried under the immediate disagreement. Excavating them gives you something to build toward rather than something to fight over. Prioritize and be willing to let go. One of the most practical and liberating questions you can ask yourself before entering any negotiation or conflict resolution conversation is, if I could only get 3 things from this conversation, what would they be? This forces you to prioritize, to distinguish between the things that actually matter and the things you've been defending simply because they're yours. Once you know what you're genuinely not willing to compromise on, everything else becomes negotiable. And that negotiating range is often much larger than you assumed when you were defending everything indiscriminately. Look for the win-win. The best solutions are the ones where both parties walk away feeling that their core needs were heard and at least substantially met. Not perfectly met, that's often not possible, but substantially met. Enough that both sides can genuinely commit to the outcome rather than just tolerating it while waiting for the opportunity to relitigate. Solutions that one party feels were imposed on them rarely hold. Solutions that both parties help design tend to last. The investment of goodwill in finding a genuine win-win is almost always repaid many times over in the durability and quality of the resolution. Number 9. seek external aid without shame. Picture yourself tangled in a thicket of thorns, the branches twisting and tightening no matter which direction you move. You can see where you want to go. You cannot figure out how to get there. Progress feels impossible, and the longer you struggle, the more entangled you become. This is an experience that everyone who has ever been in a serious, protracted conflict knows intimately. There comes a point in some conflicts where the parties are simply too close to the problem, too emotionally invested, too locked into their respective narratives to find the way out on their own. And at that point, the wisest, most stoic thing you can do is ask for help. The reason people resist this is pride. The belief that needing outside assistance is a sign of failure, of weakness, of not being capable enough to solve your own problems. The Stoics had no patience for this kind of pride. For them, the willingness to use every available resource in the pursuit of wisdom and resolution was itself a mark of wisdom. The person who refuses help out of pride is not strong, they are simply stuck. Clear the lines of communication. A skilled mediator or counselor brings something that neither party in a conflict can provide for themselves: genuine neutrality. They have no stake in the outcome. They have no history with either party that colors their perception. They can hear what is being said without the layers of accumulated grievance and assumption that both parties carry. This fresh perspective can break logjams that seemed permanent. It can name dynamics that neither party could see because both were too immersed in them. It can create the conditions for a conversation that simply wasn't possible without an outside presence. Build a bridge of understanding. Trained mediators and counselors also bring specific skills in helping parties understand each other's perspectives. They know how to ask questions that open rather than close. They know how to reflect back what they're hearing in ways that feel accurate to the speaker and illuminating to the listener. They can facilitate the kind of genuine mutual understanding that most people in conflict desperately want, but are unable to create for themselves. Steer the conversation toward resolution. Beyond facilitating understanding, effective external help can also keep the conversation moving forward productively. Conflicts have a tendency to circle back on themselves endlessly, revisiting the same grievances and the same positions without ever making real progress. A skilled facilitator can recognize when this is happening and gently redirect the conversation toward the future rather than the past, toward what we want to build rather than who was wrong about what. Provide tools for the journey ahead. Perhaps the most lasting benefit of seeking outside help is not the resolution of the immediate conflict, but the skills and insights you take away from the process. A good mediator or counselor doesn't just solve the current problem, they help you understand the patterns and dynamics that created it, and they give you the tools to handle similar situations more effectively in the future. This is the Stoic vision of external aid at its best, not dependency, but development. Number 10, practice forgiveness. Imagine yourself chained to an enormous rock, its weight pulling you downward, its jagged edges cutting into your skin. You cannot move forward. You cannot rest comfortably. Every moment is defined by the weight you're carrying and the pain it causes. Now imagine that the key to unlocking those chains has been in your hand the entire time. That key is forgiveness. And like almost everything in Stoic philosophy, forgiveness is radically misunderstood. People tend to think of forgiveness as something you do for the person who wronged you, a gift you extend to them, a pardon you issue. That misunderstanding is what makes forgiveness feel so difficult and so unjust. Why should I forgive someone who doesn't deserve it? Why should I let them off the hook? But that is not what forgiveness is. Seneca understood this when he wrote that he who is revengeful lives with a wound always open. Forgiveness is not about the other person. It is about you. It is about releasing yourself from the ongoing costs of carrying unresolved anger and resentment. It is about reclaiming the mental and emotional energy that bitterness consumes. It is the decision to stop allowing something that happened in the past to continue damaging your present. Turn the focus from them to you. The fundamental reframe of forgiveness is this: stop thinking about whether the other person deserves to be forgiven and start thinking about whether you deserve to be free. Because the ongoing cost of resentment is paid by you, not by them. The other person may have moved on entirely, may not even be aware of the effect their actions had. while you continue to carry the weight of what happened, replaying it, being re-injured by it, allowing it to shape your current experience of life. That is the wound that Seneca describes, and it is yours to heal. Recognize the power of perspective. Forgiveness sometimes begins with understanding. Not excusing, understanding. What was happening in that person's life that led to the behavior that hurt you? What were they afraid of? What were they struggling with? What limitations of character, of awareness, of circumstance shaped their actions? This inquiry is not about absolving them, it is about humanizing them. And humanizing the person who hurt you is one of the most effective ways to begin loosening the grip of resentment. Let go, but don't forget. There is a crucial distinction that forgiveness requires you to understand, the difference between the memory of what happened and the emotional charge attached to that memory. You are not asked to forget. Forgetting would be both impossible and unwise. The memory contains information and lessons that are genuinely valuable. What you are releasing is the ongoing pain, the bitterness, the desire for the other person to suffer, the way the memory destabilizes you every time it surfaces. You keep the lesson. You release the wound. Practice active forgiveness. For most people, forgiveness is not a single decision, but an ongoing practice. You decide to forgive, and then 3 days later, the old anger surfaces again, and you have to decide again and again. This is not failure. This is the normal process of genuine forgiveness. The decision needs to be renewed repeatedly, especially in the early stages, until it gradually becomes your default relationship to what happened. Tools like journaling, meditation, and therapy can support this process enormously. The practice of consciously choosing, again and again, to release the emotional grip of the past is one of the most powerful investments you can make in your own well-being. Number 11. Find growth from the ashes of conflict. Think of a phoenix, consumed by flames and yet not destroyed by them, transformed by them. Emerging from the fire not as the same creature that entered it, but as something stronger, something brighter, something that could not have existed without the destruction that preceded it. This is the Stoic vision of what conflict can be when you approach it with the right mindset. Not a catastrophe to be survived, but a crucible. Not something that diminishes you, but something that, if you meet it correctly, makes you more fully yourself. Epictetus lived most of his life as a slave. He had no wealth, no status, no physical freedom, and yet he became one of the most influential philosophers in the history of Western thought, precisely because he understood that the external circumstances of a life cannot determine the quality of a character. What determines character is how you respond to those circumstances, what you learn from them, what you build in yourself as a result of having faced them. Make the best use of what is in your power and take the rest as it happens, he said. This is not resignation. This is strategic engagement with reality. Adopt a growth mindset. The single most important cognitive shift you can make in relation to conflict is from a fixed mindset. This is a problem, it's happening to me, it reflects badly on me, to a growth mindset. This is information. It's happening for me. It's showing me something I need to see. This shift doesn't minimize the pain of conflict, but it transforms the meaning of that pain from pointless suffering into purposeful growth. And meaning, the Stoics knew, is the difference between experiences that break you and experiences that build you. Do your inner excavation. Real growth from conflict requires honest, rigorous self-examination. Not self-flagellation, the Stoics had no interest in that, but genuine inquiry. What was my role in this conflict? What did I do that contributed to how things escalated? What beliefs, fears, or patterns in me made this more difficult than it needed to be? What did this conflict reveal about my values? Specifically, the places where I claim to hold a value but don't actually live by it. These questions are uncomfortable. They are also extraordinarily productive because they point directly at the places where real personal growth is available. Identify concrete next steps. Insight without action is just interesting. The Stoics were deeply practical people. They were not interested in self-knowledge as an end in itself, but as a foundation for better action. Once you've identified what the conflict revealed about you, translate that understanding into specific, concrete commitments. If the conflict showed you that you tend to shut down when you feel criticized, commit to a specific practice, therapy, journaling, communication training, that will build your capacity to stay open. If it revealed that you have a pattern of avoiding difficult conversations until they explode, commit to addressing issues earlier. Make it concrete, make it measurable, actually do it. Seek feedback and guidance. The perspective of someone outside the situation, a trusted friend, a therapist, a mentor, is invaluable precisely because they can see things you can't see from inside your own experience. Our blind spots, by definition, are invisible to us. A trusted outside perspective can illuminate them. Seek out people who will be honest with you, not just supportive of you. The most valuable feedback is not what makes you feel good about yourself, it's what helps you see yourself accurately. Number 12, the importance of setting boundaries. Picture yourself standing on a beautiful beach. The sound of the waves steady and soothing, the air clean and clear. For a moment, everything is exactly as it should be. And then someone steps into your space, too close, too loud, too demanding, and the peace evaporates. The question is, what do you do next? The Stoics understood something profound about the relationship between external circumstances and internal states. Epictetus was unequivocal. We cannot control what other people do. We cannot control the waves. What we can control is where we stand in relation to them, and what we're willing to tolerate when they come too close. Boundaries are not about controlling others. They are about defining, clearly and honestly, the conditions under which you can function at your best and engage with the world from a place of genuine health and wholeness. Know your inner compass. Effective boundaries begin with self-knowledge. You cannot communicate clearly what you need if you don't know what you need. This requires honest reflection. What behaviors genuinely undermine your ability to function? What treatment consistently leaves you feeling depleted, disrespected, or unsafe? What conditions do you need in order to show up as your best self? The answers to these questions are your internal limits, the lines that, when crossed, tell you that something important is being violated. Knowing those lines is the prerequisite for everything else. Communicate directly and respectfully. The boundary itself is internal, but communicating it is an interpersonal act that requires skill. Vague hints don't work. Passive-aggressive signals don't work. What works is clear, direct, specific communication about what you need and what you will and won't accept, delivered calmly, without hostility and without apology. When you speak to me that way, I'm not able to have a productive conversation. I need us to communicate differently. That is a boundary. It is not a wall. It is not an ultimatum delivered in anger. It is an honest statement of what you need in order for the relationship to work. Consistency is the key. A boundary that you sometimes hold and sometimes abandon is not a boundary. It is an erratic signal that teaches people they can keep testing to find the exception. Every time you fail to hold a limit you've set, you are teaching the people around you that your stated needs are negotiable. Every time you hold it, especially when it's uncomfortable, especially when there's pressure to cave, you are teaching them the opposite. Consistency is not stubbornness. It is integrity. It is the alignment between what you say you need and how you actually behave. Prepare for pushback. Setting clear limits, especially for the first time in a relationship where they haven't previously existed, will often be met with resistance. The people who have benefited from the absence of those limits will not always welcome their appearance. Expect this, prepare for it. And when it comes, hold your ground, not with aggression, not with escalation, but with calm, repeated clarity. I understand this is a change. This is still what I need. That is the Stoic response to pushback. Not anger, not retreat, but steady, dignified persistence. Number 13. Remember, you control your reactions. Imagine yourself caught in a violent storm. The waves are enormous, crashing over the sides of your ship, the wind tearing at the sails, the horizon invisible through the driving rain. Every element of the storm is beyond your control. The storm doesn't care about you. It doesn't respond to your arguments or your anger or your fear. It simply is what it is. But your ship is yours. Your hands on the wheel are yours. The decisions you make about how to navigate, when to hold course, when to adjust, when to take down the sails and simply ride it out, those are yours entirely. And everything about the outcome depends on those decisions. This is the final and perhaps most foundational of all the Stoic insights about conflict. You cannot control what happens to you, but you have absolute authority over how you respond to it. This idea is so central to Stoic philosophy that it appears in one form or another in virtually every Stoic text. For Epictetus, it was the distinction between what is up to us and what is not. For Marcus Aurelius, it was the discipline of assent, the deliberate choice about how to interpret and respond to events. For Seneca, it was the cultivation of a will that external circumstances could not touch. Identify your triggers. Self-mastery begins with self-knowledge, and the most important self-knowledge in the domain of conflict is an accurate map of your own emotional triggers. What specific behaviors, phrases, or situations reliably provoke a strong reaction in you? Are there particular tones of voice that set you off? Specific accusations or criticisms that hit unusually hard? Situations that echo old wounds in ways that make your reaction disproportionate to the present moment? Mapping these triggers doesn't mean you'll never be triggered. It means that when the reaction begins, you'll recognize it for what it is rather than mistaking it for clear perception. Pause and create space. Between the trigger and the response, there is a gap. In most people, in most moments, that gap is vanishingly small. The trigger fires and the reaction follows almost instantaneously. But that gap can be expanded. With practice and intention, you can learn to insert a conscious pause between stimulus and response, a breath, a moment of deliberate observation, a brief internal question. What is actually happening here, and what do I actually want to do about it? This pause is where your freedom lives. It is the space in which the automatic reaction can be examined and, if necessary, replaced with a deliberate choice. Shift your perspective. Our emotional responses are not reactions to events themselves, but to our interpretations of events. The same thing happens to two different people, and one of them experiences it as a catastrophic personal attack, while the other experiences it as a minor inconvenience. The event is identical. The interpretation is different. This means that one of the most powerful levers you have over your emotional responses is the deliberate examination and, when necessary, revision of your interpretations. Ask yourself, is this the only way to see this situation, or is there another equally valid interpretation that produces a less destructive emotional response? You're not looking for toxic positivity, you're looking for accuracy. Choose your response deliberately. Once you've created the pause and examined your interpretation, you have a genuine choice about how to respond. Not just a reaction, but a response. Something you've actually thought about. Something that reflects your values and your goals, rather than just your fears and your defensiveness. Ask yourself, what response will I be proud of in an hour, in a day? What response actually moves things in the direction I want them to go? The Stoics called this the discipline of action, the commitment to acting from reason and principle, rather than from impulse and emotion. Practice consistently. This is, genuinely, a skill. Like any skill, it develops through practice. You will not master it immediately. You will slip, sometimes badly. You will react when you meant to respond. You will say things you regret. The Stoic response to that is not guilt or self-recrimination. It is simply to notice, to understand what happened, and to recommit to the practice. Every difficult situation you navigate with even slightly more grace than you would have previously is evidence of growth. Build on it. Keep going. These 13 Stoic-inspired techniques can help you turn conflict from a battleground into a place of learning, understanding, and genuine inner calm. None of them are easy. All of them get better with practice, and the cumulative effect of applying them consistently, even imperfectly, is a life in which you are less at the mercy of your circumstances and more in command of yourself. Remember, the real triumph is not about defeating your opponent. It never was. It is about mastering your own emotions, owning your responses, and emerging from every conflict, no matter how painful, no matter how difficult, as a stronger, clearer, more grounded version of yourself. That is the Stoic promise, and it is one that has been kept over and over again for more than 2,000 years.